judge is providing feedback to students on their performances. The way that you're going to give this feedback to them is in writing on the ballot. The ballot is that piece of paper that you get where you're able to rank and rate competitors as well as provide feedback that you have for their performances. Please do not give any sort of verbal feedback to students during or after the round. We want all of that to be in writing on that ballot so that the students and their coaches can look over your feedback after the round and determine what type of feedback they want to implement to change their performances. So in this video, we're going to first go over why your feedback matters and then talk about what types of feedback to include as well as what to avoid so that students are able to benefit from your feedback as best they can. So first, let's talk about why your feedback is important. If you're worried that you don't have the expertise necessary to be able to give students appropriate feedback, squash that little bit of doubt in your mind because trust us, you are qualified. We would not have asked you to judge if we didn't think that you had valuable information to pass along to the students. Now, you do not have to have years of experience or training in communication, public speaking, or interpretation to be able to offer valuable feedback to students. In fact, we like it when people from outside of the forensics community are able to judge and provide that perspective. Because sometimes we as a community can get a little insular, and having you, someone with a completely fresh perspective, judge our events allows us to make sure that what we do trains our students for communication in the real world, not just training them to check boxes for how to win a competition. Now, that being said, let's talk about what type of feedback is helpful and then what type of feedback to avoid. The types of feedback that are helpful for students on the ballot include both positive and critical feedback. A mix of both is actually really good because it encourages students to continue to do what they've been doing well and then gives them tips for improvement so they can make these performances better in the future. When students are performing prepared events, such as our public address events or our oral interpretation events, they're actually performing the exact same event all year long. So if you give them feedback earlier in the year, say in the fall, October, November, they're able to incorporate that feedback to make their performances stronger that next spring. Even if you're judging one of our national tournaments, the feedback that you're able to offer students allows them to grow as performers for the next year of competition or for when they're able to enter into the real world and become communicators. So feedback that is encouraging but also allows room for improvement is really good. One thing that I like to do is to sandwich some critical feedback between positive ones so that students know not only what they're doing well, but what they can do to become better. So I might start off by commenting on something that they did really well in that performance and then add a couple of pieces of critical feedback, letting them know what they could do better, and then following it up with some more positive information. You can get feedback on any aspect of that performance that you think is going to be helpful. And once again, use your judgment. There's no objective judging criteria for forensics. And you, as someone who has that background and knowledge of how to communicate in the real world, are going to be able to use that to provide helpful feedback for the students. Now, you might be thinking, I have no idea how to give critical feedback without making these students feel terrible about themselves. And we don't want that, right? We want the students to feel empowered and to learn and grow from this activity. And so one way that we can provide critical feedback that can be helpful rather than debilitating to the students is to couch that feedback in I language rather than you language. So what that means is that when you're providing critical feedback, you frame it as I think, I feel, or I would recommend instead of what you, the performer, did wrong. For example, you might note on a ballot for informative speaking, I think that you could find some better sources to support this claim that you're trying to make. The source that you cited isn't exactly one that's trustworthy. So what you're doing there is you're able to let them know the way that they're using sources for evidence in this speech isn't very good. But you're not just saying, you need to find a better source. You're framing it as, I think this source could be stronger, that communicates the same message, but doesn't feel like you're attacking them or their performance. Rather, you're encouraging them and offering suggestions for how to move forward. So a mix of positive and critical feedback is really helpful. That being said, there are some things that you want to avoid commenting on in a student's performance on that ballot. One thing that we want to avoid commenting on are feedback related to the student's identity or appearance. Comments related to how a student looks in that round, particularly a critique of that, is not appropriate for the ballot. Similarly, you want to avoid comments critiquing some component of a student's identity, be it their race, gender, or really any component of their identity, even as it's relating to that performance, unless there's a very specific reason for you doing so. A lot of times that feedback related to identity or appearance can once again feel like you're attacking the student and undermining the value of what it is that they're trying to do and the perspective that they're trying to bring. One other thing that we want to avoid is any sort of comment related to a student's disability if you're able to receive a notice of accommodations for that disability. So some tournaments, including Novice Nationals, are going to offer accommodation statements to students who have documented disabilities. This means that you as a judge will be notified when a student has a disability that's impacting something about their performance. Now, those accommodation statements are pretty vague, but what they'll do is they'll give you some advice as to what types of feedback to be considerate with. For example, if you have a student who has a documented speech impediment in your round, you might get an accommodation statement noting that this student has a documented disability that involves their ability to articulate particular sounds. Then we would advise you to please be considerate with comments on the ballot about articulation. If you're receiving this accommodation notice, it would not be appropriate to critique the student's articulation because that student has a documented disability that impacts their ability to articulate some sounds the way that we expect them to. So if you've got that notice of accommodations, please respect that and refrain from making comments on that particular area that the accommodation statement is advising you to avoid. Let's summarize all of this. Number one, your feedback is really important. You have valuable advice to offer students on how to communicate, and being able to write that on the ballot allows those students to learn and grow from your perspective. Second, the types of comments that are good to include on a ballot are comments that are a mix of both positive and critical feedback. When a student's doing something well, let them know and try to be specific so that they understand what it is that's actually working about that performance. But you also want to include critical feedback, letting the students know what they could do better so that they can then continue to learn and grow as a performer. And then finally, comments to avoid include comments about a student's identity, appearance, or any sort of disability when you're receiving a notice of accommodations. You play a critical role in this activity, and the biggest part of that role is being able to provide feedback so our students can get better. So please give students feedback so that they can become better performers. Let them know what you liked, what you think they can do better, and you are going to do an awesome job providing feedback for this round.